We just had Dr. Caroline Leaf on.
Oh my word. It's like drinking from a fire
Fire
hose, Jason.
hose, man. Dr. Caroline Leaf is a communication pathologist and a cognitive neuroscientist with a whole bunch of degrees and years and years and years of experience. And my mind is broken right now. It's amazing.
Well, like she said, our minds needed to be kind of broken down to be built back up, right? Oh
Yeah.
my, the renewing of the mind and
Yeah.
the capturing of thoughts. She has a new book out called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. And man,
Comes
we
out.
got into the deep end of the pool on this one.
Yeah, renewing your mind, an understanding of the science behind it. Some of the things she said, the idea that we are love, that our minds. First of all, we couldn't ask her a lot of questions because she was just.
Well, because
giving
we're
us-
not that smart. She
Well,
just
no.
needs to tell us what to do.
She just was giving us so much, like you said, a fire hose. But one of the things she said that I wanted to just ask her about was when she talked about how your mind is made for optimism. Like,
Yeah, we are made for love.
we are made for love. I mean,
Brilliant.
It's unbelievable,
Yeah,
man.
I feel like this has been one of the best
Yeah.
Rethinking God podcasts we've ever had. And you know what? The irony is, this is the one person that doesn't like tacos.
Sorry. I know. She seemed unimpressed with the taco part of things. She was like, yeah.
I feel like we need to renew her mind in that area.
Yeah. We were able to find common ground in the South African taco. My brother and I believe that shawarmas are the taco of South Africa. And so she came on board there. But, man, just a brilliant podcast where
Yeah.
she essentially gives us really practical understanding of how our mind, emotions, and spirit work together,
Yeah.
who we are as people, and how to navigate trauma, how to navigate really any of the brokenness of this world in a way where we can step into transformation and freedom and health.
And using Jesus as a model.
Yeah,
I gotta say, this has been absolutely one of my favorite
yeah, me too.
that we've done, and
Yeah.
I'm excited for our listeners to hear it.
Yeah, you guys are going to be blown away on this one.
Wow, Dr. Leaf, we are so thankful to have you here today. You know, when my wife found out that we were going to be interviewing the Dr. Caroline Leaf, she was just over the top because you have been so instrumental in our lives, in our church, but personally in our lives, helping us understand what it means to have healthy brains, understanding how to return to joy. So just want to thank you for being here. I know our audience is going to be thrilled, but my wife is going to be the most thrilled.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I love talking about the subject and it helps people, and that's what counts. But I believe so much in what I do, and I've seen so many over the years, nearly 40 years now in this field, so much positivity around this concept, and it's pretty much driving us. You know, we've got to understand our mind. Our mind is everything. You wake up with your mind, you go to bed with your mind, your mind never stops. So you don't manage it. It's a mess. And it's really what I teach is the science of renewing the mind and how to bring a thought into captivity. That's essentially what I'm doing.
Yeah, the ability to renew our minds is, I think, one of the most important things we can ever participate in.
It is.
Rethinking God, rethinking ourselves, who we are. It's the evidence that we're alive.
Absolutely.
And it's the heartbeat behind this podcast. In the context of perfect love, we're rethinking how we live, move, and have our being, what makes us tick. And it's why we're really excited to have you on because you're brilliant.
Thank
and
you.
I think you're the first neuroscientist I've ever had an actual conversation with. So this is going to be fun. Honored to have you here. And we're really excited to dive into this new book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, where you help us understand what's actually happening in the brain, understanding why we need to manage what's going on, why the renewal of our mind is so important. And the book comes out March 2nd.
Yeah, 2nd of March. Did you get the copy?
Yeah, we did. I'm halfway through it and it's incredible.
Wonderful.
I also love the cover.
Isn't that fun, the cover? We're so excited about the cover. And we've even got some colored images. I managed to convince my publisher to put colored images of the brain inside. So, you know, the brain scans and things that I do. And it just makes it so much more, now I can't find them, you know, just to see inside the brain and to see the brain scans of what things, so what I'm talking about is real, and which is really cool. So we can maybe touch on a couple of those things in the interview.
Let's do it. I've been reading your book, and I was telling my wife the other day, I've been reliving an experience and a decision that I made almost 20 years ago that was pivotal in my life, a great shift in my thinking and my believing and how I would approach life that has impacted everything. And this book has brought language, scientific understanding, clarity on what took place in that moment,
Wonderful.
and maybe the fruit of some of the decisions I made in that moment. So I want to tell you this story, and then maybe it sets up the book, and it sets up you to be able to articulate maybe what was happening to me, and then take it from there.
Absolutely.
We were in our late 20s, and I had just experienced a disappointment that shook me to my core. And I was trying to figure out, in the context of my faith and my life, how to move forward. I think I was trying to figure out how to navigate some of this pain of disappointment.
Mm.
And I determined that the best way to do so was to become a realist. And this was the language I had at the time, the language I used with my wife. I knew that my faith, wouldn't allow me to be a pessimist, because for a believer, there's believing and unbelief. Those are the only two options. And I grew up with that foundational approach to life and faith. So I told my wife one day, I said, babe, I think I'm a realist. And I said it as though it was a profound insight. And I used the glass half full, half empty analogy to articulate where I was. I said, I don't see a glass half full or half empty. I just see a glass and it's
Yeah.
halfway. I'm a realist. I'm going to call it like I see it. The glass is halfway. My wife was like, sounds good, babe. She was letting me navigate it. And while it might have helped me in that moment navigate some of the disappointment, it wasn't life-giving. Within a week, I was out for a walk. It was my prayer time. I was interacting with God, and in the middle of my explanation to him of realism, he said, Jason, that's great, but I'm not a realist.
Mm.
And then using my language to talk to me, he said, Jason, I'm an optimist. I'm an eternal optimist. When I see a glass, it doesn't even have to have a drop in it for me to see the potential of the glass being overflowing. So,
Mm-hmm.
son, you can be a realist if you want, but a realist is just a pessimist with window dressing. You
Mm.
got to choose. Either you can believe, which invites you to see the potential in all things. It's a hopeful perspective. Or you don't believe. Those are your two options. And unbelief is an option full of hopelessness. And, God knows how to speak to you. For me, it was a powerful shift that took place. I repented. I had a rethink right in that moment, a renewing of my mind that then took months. And this is the part that I find fascinating while reading your book. I made a decision that day to change the way I think, but it took months and months and months to remap my brain. As I'm reading your book, I'm thinking, oh, maybe it actually even rewired my brain.
Yeah.
But in that moment, I decided I would be an optimist. That was the language I had. I would be a believer. And what I discovered right away was how much unbelief, how much negativity, how much pessimism was a part of every part of my life. Because the first conversation I had after that moment of repenting was with a friend who was talking about a business idea. And the first thing that flooded my mind as he began to speak were all the reasons it wouldn't work, all the reasons it would fail. And I remember actively standing there in the conversation and telling myself to see the full potential of what he was talking about and then speak to those things. Over the course of 6 months, I would find myself in multiple conversations or just thinking through my day and constantly having to address the pessimistic unbelief perspective that I had immersed myself in through the
Mm-hmm.
window dressing of realism. And it took about 6 months for me to change the way I thought, so that my
Mm-hmm.
first natural response wasn't negativity, but it was positivity. It wasn't pessimism, but it was optimism. And I remember having a conversation one day when somebody was sharing a passion and a dream they had, and I began to get really excited. Naturally, I thought of all the reasons it would work, and I began to tell them. And I remember when the conversation was over thinking, oh my goodness, I've changed. I've changed. My approach to life has changed. And the reason that I was enjoying reading this book and getting insight from your book is because there was more life and joy and grace and liberty and freedom. It
Yeah.
affected my outlook on life, and it affected and began to impact my relationships positively. It affected my days. I suddenly was hopeful and full of life. And as I read your book, I realized that there was some mind management taking place inspired by God, inspired by my relationship with God, but it was mind management taking place, and it's science. Could you speak to that in light of this new book you've got coming out?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for that great, that great example of basically reconceptualizing, which is the end product of capturing thoughts and renewing the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not supposed to eliminate your story, you're supposed to see it differently. And so that's what reconceptualize means. So essentially, what you took was the house that was like, if think of imagine renovating a house, and you see this
Yeah.
ugly house and you buy it because it's a great area and you've got this great plan, you knock it down, but before you do, you take all these photos of the mold and the grossness, and it's dark and terrible carpets and just awful, and then you knock it down and you build this beautiful new home, and you still remember the ugly old house, but now you have this beautiful new space.
Yeah.
And so it's intertwined in one, so you've reconceptualized. And I'm going to now give you an algebraic equation, and then I'm going to go into the science and make it very simple. So basically, all of us have been exposed to the concept of x plus y equals z. When you go to school and you start learning basic algebra, you learn x plus y equals z, with z being something completely new that replaces the old. That's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's wrong. Okay, that's wrong. What we're doing with our mind, we can't do that. And that's, I mean, we try and do that when we get something new that replaces the old, we've actually eliminated a part of our story. So what we need to do is, I know Z seems to be so logical, and it's the philosophy of very Western philosophy, that kind of concept. But actually, it's a whole different story. What it is x plus y equals xy,
Yeah.
and the XY is bonded in a different part. So the X is the old and the Y is the new, and the two together, you have a reconceptualized picture, because we cannot eliminate what's gone on in the past, but we can change how it plays out into the future. So by using the terminology of seeing the glass full as opposed to halfway or half empty, or all the examples, you can consider half empty, half full, or you decided to say halfway. Even halfway is not a bad thing towards the full.
Mm-hmm.
It was part of your reconceptualizing journey. And then you got to the point what worked
Yeah.
for you
Yeah.
was to see it as full. But in giving the example of a
Yeah.
friend who told you a business idea and you started seeing all the things wrong, all those things that are wrong are very real things that could happen. But the shift is in you not just seeing that as a negative thing and going down a negative hole, but seeing that as those are possibilities that you could learn from. So let's see how you could swing those into the antidote.
Yeah.
So that's reconceptualization. That is capturing that negative thought and renewing it according to the standard of what we are made of, which is love. We're literally made
Wow.
of love. We know we're made in God's image. God is love, so we're made of love.
Wow.
And we see that neuroscientifically. So I have some props. Are people seeing this on video as well?
No, not yet. We're still just an audio podcast. We'll just have to describe what you're showing us.
Okay, so I'm holding a brain.
I feel like I'm in school. This is awesome. Not a real brain.
It's not a real one. I wish I could
Right.
say it was. I wish I could say it was all real, but it's not. But anyway, so yeah, I'm holding up
Yeah.
a brain, and basically what we're doing is we are changing how this brain functions. We are basically redesigning the structure of the brain
Right.
every moment. So in this whole process, what we're doing, like, okay, so now I'm going to go from a big picture, then I'm going to go to the science and explain this whole thing. So we've all got the analogy so far of your story, the analogies I've given of the house, this concept of reconceptualization, XY. Your story is part of your shaping, it's part of your character. Life is experimental. We have been given the ability to think and feel and choose. And that is what your mind is. So we're made in God's image, we're made in love. God is love, so we
Right.
are love. And love is activated through
Right.
mind, and mind is think, feel, choose. Okay, now hold that thought for a moment and come back to the brain. And what we see in neuroscience is that the brain is actually wired for love, which means that there isn't a single structure of the 100 structures in the brain and all the different neurochemistry and right down to the level of when you go into the cells and you go into the individual parts of the cell, the DNA, down to the level of the DNA, every single thing about the brain and the body. So now I'm holding up a body with the brain in it. Everything about the brain and the body is wired for love. So what that means neurobiologically and biologically, and that statement, by the way, was made by a Nobel Prize winning scientist
Wow.
who said the brain is wired for love. That means that we don't have structures for fear, anxiety, depression, toxic envy, jealousy, bitterness, despair, etc., etc. We don't have structures in the brain for that. And we don't have things in the brain jumping out to give that to you. The brain can't do anything. When you dead, the brain disintegrates, the body disintegrates. So the thing that is bringing energy to the brain and the body is the mind.
Right.
And the mind is you, and the mind is totally spiritual. So when we talk spirit, soul, body, we're talking here's body and brain and body, and mind is spirit, soul.
Right.
And so you've got this, and so we see them as separate as opposed to one thing. And in our current language of today, we use mind and brain very interchangeably as though it's the same thing. And we throw around words like thoughts and memories and toxic thoughts and emotions, but do we really understand what they are? So my goal in life is to try and help you to unpack this and understand it, because otherwise you're just going to say renew the mind, capture the thoughts, bring all thoughts into captivity, but no one's doing anything. It's just like they're slapping on scriptures as a band-aid, or using God as a genie and wondering why their life is lousy, and then blaming the devil. And then I say, okay, well then you don't even believe on what was done at Gethsemane, because if the devil was defeated according to my reading of the Bible. But so we've got to be careful what we're saying, and the habits that we've got into, and the behaviors that we are kind of performing. So coming with all that, having said that, let's go back to the beginning. So our brain and body are the physical part of us. It's the 1% of who we are, maybe 10%, but closer to 1%.
Right.
So you as two humans looking at me, and you looking at me, back at me as one human, and all the humans listening, we are, our body, brain and body are 1 to 10% of who we are.
Yeah.
The other part of who we are is our mind. And our mind encapsulates the spirit and the soul, if you want the sort of Christianese element of it. And this brain and this mind are wired for love, have an optimism bias.
Yeah.
So that means that we have to learn to operate in the toxic. And there's a very interesting thing I'm going to tell you in a moment about the toxic, because immediately people are thinking, okay, if I have anxiety or depression, I'm in sin. You're not in sin at all. You must actually even put the word sin out, because it's incredibly depressing to think of it like that. You can rather find another word, missing the mark or whatever, but because sin has got such an end game kind of feel to it, or zero sum kind of feel to it, that people feel hopeless, and people are dying from a lack of hope. We have a pandemic, not just COVID, but we have a pandemic of people dying 8 to 25 years younger than they should. In this current advanced medical and technological age, we have people dying from deaths of despair, from preventable lifestyle diseases linked to lack of hope and incorrect management of mind, all that stuff. And it's dying 8 to 25 years younger. So we've got a massive issue. Then COVID hit, and COVID's brought us to our knees to rethink how we do life, which it's terrible. COVID's terrible, but we can't carry on like we were. And so it is going to have to shift how we go into the future. And so that's a whole reconceptualized future that we need to look into. We need to do an XY situation going into the future. And I believe that will happen. So coming back to the brain and the body being 1%, what does that make the mind? 90 to 99%. Where is the mind? The mind surrounds the brain and the body and moves through the brain and the body. When you die, the brain and the body go away, but we know that the mind, soul, spirit, soul lives on forever. So what do we use to understand that? Neuroscience is how we understand the brain, and neurobiology and biology is how we understand the body and how we learn about the body. How do we understand the mind? We use things like gravitational fields and quantum physics and electromagnetics and the different types of physics. So classical physics with quantum physics blended together help us to get an understanding of what mind is, which is this gravitational field. It's this force. Einstein and even people before Einstein began this work. And the most basic understanding, before people get frightened of words like energy, let me say this right up front. And I have to say this because I teach in churches and I teach in neuroscience conferences. I never have to say this in a neuroscience conference, but I have to say it in churches, because people think science and spirituality are opposing forces. And I never understand why, because let's have a look at this. Science comes from the word sclera. Sclera means knowledge. So therefore, who is the source of all knowledge? God. So therefore, science is God's stuff. It's how what he may, no, I don't even like to say God is he. I correct myself, because I don't believe God is he, because God is, that's just man's interpretation. I rather talk about Godness, because I don't put God in a box. God, and it says male and female made us in his image. So we do not made us, and even that his, if you translate back, go back to all the original translations, wasn't in the original scripts. So we have to talk about God as this massive Godness, God. We should say God all the time as opposed to a pronoun. And if we go back to the concept of God being this massiveness, we have been made in that kind of image. And our mind has got the characteristics of this power. And those characteristics are creative, or have
Mhm.
Genesis power, creative power. Because being made in God's image, we read that we are able to think, feel, and choose from scriptures like Deuteronomy 30:19, which tells you, I lay before you life and death, blessing, cursing, choose. Throughout the scriptures, throughout the Bible, you see the words choose come in. And interestingly enough, you'll see it coming in all the holy texts of different religions. You'll see that mankind has the ability to think and feel and choose. So what is mind? Mind is this force, the spiritual force that is innovating the brain and the body. And it is a force, it's your you-ness, and you, or the I factor, whatever you want to say, is your mind.
Yeah.
And your mind is this phenomenal ability to think, feel, and choose, which is your processing capability, and your brain and your body express that. So here's how it's happening. Right now, everyone's listening. So there's auditory sound waves going out from my mouth and our discussion, so your mouths too. And then also, if those that are seeing the visuals, if it is visual, they're getting electromagnetic light waves. So there's all these different waves that are coming at you with this information. The information is waves of energy. God is the source of all knowledge, so science is therefore understanding this. So what I'm describing is
Yeah.
the knowledge that God has given us. So God is has created the world, and the Bible is the story and the philosophy of what it means to be a spiritual being.
Right.
But science is how it works.
Yeah.
So if people don't like science, don't use a cell phone. Don't watch this. Use
Right.
Zoom technology. Don't wear clothes. Don't complain if you have no electricity. All of that science. The growing food, wearing clothes. So can you see how we make this ridiculous split? So science and spirituality on two sides of the same coin. So all we're doing when we understand the kind of things that I'm teaching, you are actually understanding how you work. So I'm giving you the science of renewing the mind, or the science of how to bring a thought into captivity. Okay, so mind is this force that is eternal in nature, and the Bible's full of scriptures that say the invisible became visible. So it's this thing around us that is unique to you. I can't take your mind, you can't take mine.
Right.
It's unique to you. We even see that in terms of the brain. Every human's brain has the same basic structures and the way that they function, but each protein and each cell looks different. So in other words, we each have our own unique designed brain that is unique to our mind. So there's a relationship. So only my mind can work through my brain. Your mind can't work through my brain. So your brain is the receiver of what you're hearing and seeing. And at 400 billion actions per second, you are hearing and seeing what I'm saying.
Hmm.
And you and as you hear and see, you think, feel, choose. So there's all this think, feel, choose thing going on, and that then gets pushed through the brain. This think, feel, choose thing that we're doing, which is mind, which is this processing that we process the incoming information, and then that causes the brain to respond on an electrical, chemical, magnetic, and genetic level. And the result of that, the consequence of thinking, feeling, and choosing energy through the brain, is you'll build a thought. And thoughts look like trees. So I have a little plant here with lots of branches,
Yeah.
and thoughts look like trees. So thoughts are real things that occupy mental real estate. So as you're listening to me now at 400 billion actions per second, you're changing your brain.
Right.
You're growing a thought tree of this discussion. So mind, brain, mental health, whatever you want to call it. As you introduced me and told the story, you sowed this, dropped this, you literally, as you introduced the podcast, that was the seed. As you started speaking with your testing with you and your wife, and then you gave your story and whatever, that was, you were already growing roots. Those are branches, and those are proteins in the brain, literally. So and growing it, you received what you said, and it was converted into these protein structures. So everything that you're seeing and hearing from the moment you wake up till the moment you go to sleep is being converted into these thought trees, starting with the seed, which is what it's about. And then the detail is all the emotions and the data. And that then immediately produces a little tree trunk, which is your perspective of what you're hearing. And that then grows into the branches and the leaves, which are your interpretation of the information in terms of your life and how you're going to apply it. So it's all the data and the emotions and the behaviors, and that then produces what you say and what you do. This is really, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So when we use heart, 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 but this is what it is. This is the science.
Yeah. Yeah.
So therefore, whatever's coming in, we are basically processing, and this is what we need to regulate. Because if you have something that just comes in and you don't process, you're going to build a toxic issue. And because our brain, as I said already, is wired for love, and our mind, that this force that processes the think, feel, choose force that moves through the brain and causes the brain and body to respond. So the brain is the responder, the mind is the generator. Because that is wired for love, this toxic response or this toxic issue, which is there's an origin story and the roots, and there's the tree trunk and the perspective, which produces the behavior. This creates an immune reaction in the brain and the body. This is read by the brain as a real thing. So the immune system will recognize this in the same way it recognizes something like COVID. So the same kind of responses will happen. So that means that you'll get B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes and macrophages and the various different immune factors, which will then create inflammation around this area in the brain. Inflammation is there to help with healing. It's the fixing process. It's put the inflammation around so the body and brain can heal. But if you don't deal with this, the inflammation doesn't go away. So you get then autoimmune and you get the different reactions in your body. And so this continued, if you don't deal with the suppressed trauma or you don't process the trauma, you can increase your immune system function will decrease in its functionality. So you'll have an increase in, for example, white blood cell count, and you'll have an increase in inflammation across the brain and the body, and you'll have increased cortisol, and you'll have increased hormones that don't do what they're supposed to do, and that then increases your vulnerability to disease by 75 to 98%.
Yeah.
So we can't afford to keep these here because our brain is recognizing them as an invader and is trying to fight them. And our mind, this is a cluster of dark trees in a forest. So think of all these trees as forests. So every experience you have from at a certain point in the womb till the age you're at now is going to be built into these trees, and most of them will be nice, healthy green trees. But there'll be clusters of the dark in amongst because of our experiences of life. Some people will have more trauma, and it's okay. So there's different things, but that every single thing that looks toxic, every experience that's unmanaged, is going to make a mental mess and a physical mess, because your brain is rejecting that, and your mind sees that as it's an imbalance of energy.
Right.
And it's not those, but an imbalance of energy, a damaged and inflamed brain and body doesn't lead to high survival. So wired for love is survival. So God has this inbuilt mechanism in our brain and our body that is all about survival. And this is why we are drawn to fix the negative.
Yeah.
And here I'm going to now throw a little bit of our current thinking in its head. If one says the glass is half empty, and what you did something really good, you owned it, you recognized, I am saying the glass is half empty.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it's a potentially you were maybe thinking guilt, and I'm sinning and I'm bad and I shouldn't do it. And the more you tried not to do it, the more you did it. It's called the Whiteberry effect.
Right.
I mustn't think like that. It's bad. Stop thinking like that. It doesn't work. You tell yourself to stop, you're going to make it worse. That's not the way to fix something. To tell yourself to stop doesn't fix it. It makes it worse, because there's all this suppression that comes into that. And when you suppress this thing, it's still there growing and impacting you, because this will then move into the non-conscious mind. And the non-conscious mind operates 24/7, NON, non-conscious, not subconscious, not unconscious. Unconscious when you get knocked out from anesthetic or an accident or something. Non-conscious. Subconscious is between the non-conscious and the conscious. The conscious mind is what we're operating in when you wake up until you go to sleep. The non-conscious is the massive driving intelligent force, the spiritual force that is connected to God, and that is your internal power, and that goes all the time. And that's where all your experiences of life are stored in this experimental way. So every time we think, feel, and choose, we're kind of experimenting with data. What does this mean? And this is a whole experiment, and sometimes this doesn't work very well. So instead of saying, oh, I'm bad, I'm guilty, I'm condemning, it's shame, and that then makes us want to hide, we say, okay, I did something really stupid. I'm ashamed of it. I was really nasty to my wife or husband. It was totally uncalled for. Instead of saying, oh, I'm a sinner and shame and condemnation, you say, I own it. I embrace that in order to reconceptualize it. The minute that you do that, which is what you did, you embraced it, you started processing and reconceptualizing, and we haven't discussed your whole story and why you had that kind of mindset. that perspective. But I'm pretty sure that if we had the time, and if you want to, we can unpack it. But you saw that half glass empty mindset as it was a warning signal.
Right.
And as you faced that warning signal and embraced it, the minute you did that, you shifted into brain resilience instead of brain damage. Now, hear what I've just said. The minute you embrace to process and reconceptualize, the minute you start trying to work with X plus Y to make it XY, you are going to shift 1,400 neurophysiological responses and make them work for you, not against you.
Wow.
But the minute you try and suppress by saying X plus Y equals Z, I'm just going to push this down. I'm just going to force myself. I'm a big sinner. I'm just going to whack on 10 scriptures every day. Or every time I think about this, I'm just going to say 10 scriptures. That's using God as a genie and scriptures as a magic potion. That's not, and that's what people are doing, but it doesn't work because this doesn't.
It's counterproductive.
Totally. This is in your non-conscious mind, all these trees, and they are impacting your worldview. These are your belief systems, your cultural upbringing, your religious upbringing, everything you've been exposed to, all of this. So if we had to unpack why you had a negative attitude to life, if we unpack that from the signals to the behaviors and the emotions to the perspective to the origin, we would find a whole. And you may have done this, and you probably have, because it's nearly 16 years later, and you have got this under control. In the process, you would have found the origin story, and it may have taken you a few months and so on. But until you find that and then reconceptualize it into X, Y, not I talk about eliminating toxic thoughts, that my system that I've developed called the neurocycle, which is how you do this, how you find these things and capture them and renew them and embrace them and reconceptualize them and get X, Y and all that stuff. It's called the neurocycle. And the neurocycle is a scientific process of how you capture a thought, how you recognize it's there in the first place, how you capture it, and how you renew it. Renewing is this reconceptualizing, this X, Y, the see the glass is full before it's even full.
Wow.
That's the concept. But to get there, you can still remember how you were. You remember, you could describe to me. So you described X and you described the new Y. You described X, Y. But you could only get to X, Y by recognizing and embracing and facing what you did. How you were living. And we do that without shame and guilt. Own it. Embrace it. Take the guilt and the shame. Make it work for you. And then you make these 1,400 neurophysiological responses work for you, not against you. But if I say, oh no, I'm seeing half glass, I'm negative, I'm terrible, I'm a sinner, I'm a this, you go down, down, down. You make 1,400 neurophysiological responses work against you. You have decreased brain resilience and brain and body health. And that will reflect in your mind because it's a feedback loop, and you'll just feel worse and worse. These don't go away, and these are just going to increase. And the more you try and slap them down, the more they pop up. So that we have to, okay, so I gave you a really long answer, and please feel free to unpack and ask and whatever.
Wow. I think I'll be unpacking, for quite a while.
Good.
If you type into Google, if God is good, do you know what comes up? If God is good, here's the three main things that come up. Why is there suffering? Why do bad things happen? Why is there evil? What's that tell you? That most Google users, which is pretty much all of us, have a flawed understanding of God.
Hey guys, I wrote a book on the sovereignty of God. God is not in control. The whole story is better than you think. Available at afamilystory.org or anywhere books are sold.
You know, Dr. Leaf, man, my own personal story is a story of overcoming grief. But that grief obviously still remains. My first wife was killed by a drunk driver. She was 7 months pregnant.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
At the time.
I'm so sorry.
This was back in 1993. It was just absolutely devastating. And that.
Oh my gosh, no.
That has caused me a lot of issues in my own life of learning how to deal with this and renewing my mind. And I'm looking forward to hearing you speak into that about grief. And just so you know, I mean, I'm remarried, been married 25 years.
Beautiful.
My wife, Sarah, is just an absolute amazing gem.
Beautiful. Wonderful.
And we have two beautiful daughters. So I live with 3 women and a neutered dog.
A neutered dog.
But I would love for you to speak to people that feel like they're stuck in a moment. They're
Mm.
stuck in grief and they just can't get out of it.
Mm. Mm.
I've managed to use some of your teachings and many others to help me walk through that. And I don't think grief ever fully goes away. And
Yeah.
in fact, I think we were watching an episode of WandaVision recently, and they stated that isn't grief just love persevering? And I thought that was a great, great statement. It really
Mm-hmm.
like helped me a lot personally. But could you speak into that for people that feel like they're just stuck and they can't get out of tragedy and grief?
First of all, I want to acknowledge your pain. I mean, that is horrific, what you had to go through. And that grief never goes away, but you've learned over time to manage it. And you just don't have to feel any kind of guilt. And I want to just mention that because actually done quite a lot on grief. And my podcast is called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. If anyone is in grief, there is a great teaching on there. And I have a neurocycle as well for dealing with grief and all that. I just wanted to say that. And grief is such a circular thing. So you might even get hit 25, just bringing it up today, you might find that you have a reaction tonight. There's nothing wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
That is very normal to be able to allow yourself to experience that. But what you've done is you haven't kept it, you didn't keep it stuck. You turned that into, there's nothing happy about that event. But somehow you have managed to reconceptualize it. And now that terrible event, which is that, it's awful, and you're a victim, but by embracing it through the grief process and through whatever steps you took, you turn that into actually gold leaves
Mm-hmm.
inside this.
For our podcast listeners, you're holding up a dead tree in one hand and then a tree with life that has the new gold leaves growing on it.
Totally. So the XY, that toxicity becomes the gold inside here.
Yeah.
And however you've reconceptualized and seen that, which has enabled you to, so you want to honor that, you want to remember the good times, and you want to remember that's so important. Anyway, so I just wanted to stress that is your XY concept, that when you reconceptualize into something else. So you were saying, what do you say to someone when they feel like they're completely stuck and they can't move forward? That was your specific question. So
Yeah, Dr. Leaf, I just meet so many people that are literally stuck in depression and they feel like they will never get out of it. How do we help people, and how will your book help people understand that they can change their brain, that they can move forward?
Okay, such a good question. In our current era, the answer to that in our current psychiatric movement would be you're clinically depressed, get a label and get medication. And that's not going to help, because it may, you may give temporary relief. You may say, okay, well, this is why I feel bad. I've got clinical depression. I've got a chemical imbalance. No science in that at all, by the way. It's destructive. It's created more problems. We see scientifically that actually has created more problems. We now have a pandemic of mismanagement of mind. That's not going to help, but that's what would happen. But you may get temporary relief from an antidepressant because it numbs your emotions, but it doesn't fix that. And the numbing actually is actually not numbing; it's actual brain damage. But you can heal. You can heal. So anyone on any kind of psych drug, when they taper off very slowly under medical supervision, your brain can heal, and it's the healing process that brings all the withdrawal symptoms. But you can get through that under medical. I just wanted to make that as a side note, etc. So what I would say to someone in that state when they're completely stuck is that the way that you're feeling at the moment is all consuming, and it's how you are actually coping in an adverse circumstance. So the first thing is to recognize that this is normal, that you're normal, because part of a lack of hope thinks, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get out of this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know how many DMs I get and emails we get from people in the church, much more from people in the church, which is a big concern, saying that I love Jesus, but I'm still depressed. I can't get through my pain, and terrible guilt and condemnation. And my first, comment back, and I talk in general a lot about this, is that you need to not have condemnation. This is a normal human response to an adverse circumstance. And the hope that we have is there's a model in Jesus provides the model of how to manage this perfectly. And I'm not talking about the sort of philosophical spirit. Listen to what I'm saying. Very practical. If anyone was practical, Jesus was the most practical scientist out there. So what did Jesus do? He went into the garden. That means he embraced it. But Jesus didn't embrace it with a big smile on his face and, this is one happy day and all that stuff. Jesus was in terror, in desperation, in deep anxiety, deep depression. And don't think that I'm saying that, how can Jesus be depressed? read the Bible. Jesus experienced every single emotion that you're experiencing. So from the extreme psychotic breaks to disassociation to extreme levels of despair and extreme depression and anxiety, that is what Jesus embraced in the garden. But Jesus didn't run away from it. So Jesus did not go and get a label and something to suppress it. Jesus embraced it. So what we have to do if you're feeling lack of hope is to give yourself permission to get in the garden and experience the emotion. It's okay if you feel stuck, and own that. I feel stuck. I feel so depressed. I don't know how to get out of bed. I don't know how to live another day. I have suicidal thoughts, or I don't, whatever it is. I'm in such extreme anxiety that I can't cope. I can't be a father. I'm so depressed. I'm so suicidal. I can't be a decent husband or wife or child, or that's okay. Let's find the meaning behind that. Let's get in the garden and let's embrace it. And it's hard and painful. And I show in my book the link between the mind brain and how, as you experience this and face this without even facing it, any of these inside your body are affecting your, I explained it earlier, this is like your body recognizes this experience as something like a viral invader. So Jesus in the garden, you with your experience with your wife, you with that experience in your past with the negative mindset and whatever caused that, as you in that is causing inflammation in your brain. It's disrupting the balance between the two sides of the brain. It's reducing blood flow and oxygen. It's increasing cortisol levels. It's dropping DHA. It's increasing prolactin. I mean, it's all these biomarkers. I talk about a lot of them in here. I give you graphs, simple explanations. It does affect them. Why? Because your mind works through your brain and your body.
Right.
So if your mind's messy, and this is a messy situation, grief and loss and trauma and toxic habits, these are messy situations. And that's why cleaning up your mental mess is a very human thing. That the lack of hope that you feel and the despair that you feel, you being human. If you are human and alive, you are going to have a mental mess. Mental illness isn't an illness per se. It is more an experience, a response to an adverse circumstance. And it's something that you will have as a human. And sometimes it's in the -4, +4 range, but sometimes it can slide down the continuum to -7, 8, 9, 10, where you are totally broken. And Jesus had that in the garden because Jesus sweated blood. To sweat blood, your mind is so distressed that you've affected the neurophysiology of your body and your blood capillaries can burst. That is a very possible thing. Jesus sweated blood. So that shows the mind-body integration. Jesus demonstrates, number one, embrace and face. The only way out is through. You've got to feel it to heal it. You've got to get in there. And it's okay to cry, to sweat blood, to feel despair. Own it. Describe it, embrace it. And that's what the 5 steps of the neurocycle do. I teach you how to do that, and we can discuss that in a moment. So then just moving forward, Jesus turned to the disciples and didn't say, give me Prozac, swap places, give me opioids. How are we going to get out of this? Jesus turned, and I don't mean to be facetious, but really he did not ask for a way out. He simply turned to them and said, can you but be with me for an hour? Can you be with me for but an hour? In other words, you can't do this for me. This is my story. I have to go through this, but I need your support. And we see from quantum physics, it's not about you, it's about you in the world. At our most core level, of most fundamental, you can see physical, but at our core level, we're waves of love. Literally, this is science. This is hardcore science. If we go down from the physical that you see into the structures, into the cells, into the parts of the cell, into the subatomic level, and below you are particles and waves. Okay, so this is very, very real. So in order for us to help each other, we need to support each other. And this is where coaching, counseling, etc., therapy are so vital, but done properly. We can do so much damage with coaching, counseling, therapy if we think we can fix someone. You cannot fix anyone. No one can fix anyone. The only thing you can do is support. The only thing you can do is carry. I don't know if you've ever seen Lord of the Rings, but it's an incredibly amazing movie. And Tolkien was a Christian and he was a South African. So hooray to the South Africans. But the story in there is just very significant of basically we need to recognize that life is an epic journey, but we've got our own ring, we've got our own story and our own set of stories. We have our narrative, and if you ignore the narrative and you just give someone a label when they're depressed, you've ignored the narrative. To say to someone after 3 weeks who've just lost their wife and baby, if you still feel depressed, if you went to the doctor 3 weeks after and you still felt depressed, they'd give you a label of clinical depression and give you medication. You do not have a chemical depression, which doesn't even exist anyway. You have had a terrible trauma, and that trauma has definitely affected your brain and your body. Definitely you've got inflammation and all that stuff. And yes, you may need your heart health managed and dietary changes and whatever. But that is not the cause of your feelings. It's what happened. It's the external event and you having a normal reaction. So those people that are stuck, it's okay. Get in that garden and embrace it. Then Jesus was processing the processing of his ring, his whatever, his issue, the cross, which we know what it was unique to him. And what he wanted was support, not someone to fix. So we've got to make sure we enhance. Like two waves, when two waves hit each other, they enhance each other. So this is what we're supposed to be doing. We see how one wave is under the other?
Right.
That's support. I'm not fixing. I'm not trying to say, change this, which is what a lot of therapy, counseling, pastoring, and I'm not saying you do it. I'm just talking that's what's happening. We've got to do this. We've got to create this effect. And also sometimes we flatline people because you condemn them to the point where they can't do what you're telling them to do because we can only advise and support. Okay. Then it gets worse before it gets better. Jesus gets beaten up, and it gets like shredded, and then even worse on the cross. So we see this and I talk about this in the book. In the first half, I explain all the sciencey stuff in the mental health system, and very simplistically, at the science section, I say, here's a science, then I say, this is what it means for you, and there's colored pictures and all kinds of things of stuff happening in your brain, and that will help you. But essentially, it gets worse before it gets better. But on the cross is the point at which you actually reconceptualize, where you start seeing the X plus Y, and you're starting to get to that point. And then Jesus rose with the wounds in his hand. There's the X and the Y. See, it's with you, the story, the extreme story. So here we have how we manage our minds. Now, this is not a one-off event for the odd occasional thing. So your extreme trauma is one version of how we would use mind. Your mindset of the negativity was one version of how you had to fix your mind.
Right.
There's a million other habits that us three have that are toxic. And a whole lot of other traumas that we've all suffered that we still need to work on, and that we will still suffer in the future, because that's just statistically the next 5 years there will be an acute trauma in your life. That's just kind of statistically what happens because we can't control the events and circumstances. However, the shift occurs in that we can learn how to manage that. We can learn to go through the process of embracing and reconceptualizing, and embracing, processing, and reconceptualizing, which is incorporate the story into our life so it can move forward. Yeah. So that's a kind of a big answer, but it's really to give yourself permission and to get in that garden, to experience that emotion. But there's a forward movement. You don't get stuck at the beginning of the front of the garden. You move through. Yeah. So you get what we call the treatment effect happening as you move through, where the facing makes it worse. And people often say this. They're feeling awful, but then they face it and they feel worse. And we saw this with our subjects. We had some subjects that came into the clinical trial. We had a control and an experimental group. And the control group, they came in with all kinds of things. And some of them were so depressed, they were suicidal. They had tried everything. They were sleeping. Their relationships were shot. They battled to get back to work. I mean, really severe stuff. This was kind of, for some of them, one of them in particular, this was like the last shot before they were checking out kind of thing. Yeah. And that's how severe. And they'd done every kind of treatment. They'd had every label under the sun. And they came in feeling hopeless and feeling that I am depression, that this is it. That's the identity. Right. And the brain scans showed complete. In fact, this is the one that I picked up over here, this particular subject, that blue. This is inside the brain. These are the different energetic waveforms. So it's delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma, high beta, and gamma, which is how the brain is responding. These waves are moving through your brain at the moment, working with your blood flow and your oxygen and the chemicals, and it's the life force basically. And so the blue means this person was like flatlined. That think of a wave, a pool, a pond that's completely flatline. This by day 21, with using the neurocycle in app form. So they got at day 1, they came in, they got tested the brain, all their bloods, DNA, psychological testing, and then also their narrative. Most important part of the entire study was, what is your story? Mm-hmm. What's happened? What's your context, your past, your present, your dreams, your hopes? What's going on in your life? They don't do that at the moment. At the moment, it's you've seen it's the neuroreductionistic biomedical model. You're depressed, 5 symptoms, diagnosis, label, bed. Okay, that's not going to help. You've got to bring in the mind. So by day 21, this person had the same amount, same testing. All the subjects had the same testing, but after 3 weeks, we see gray. A gray in the brain means that the energy levels have all those different delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma, and high beta have started moving like they're supposed to through both sides of the brain. And the green at the front of the brain is starting to show that they don't see their identity totally as depression, but that they are experiencing depression. By day 63, this person was stabilized.
Yeah.
The brain had stabilized. And what they were saying was, at day 1, I'm depressed, I'm giving up.
Right.
Day 21, I still experience depression. Listen to the difference. I experienced depression,
Yeah,
but I'm
yeah.
now seeing why. By day 63, I don't mind the depression because now I know what to do, and it's not so often.
Huge difference.
Huge difference. And that's mind management. That's renewing of the mind. So when that person experiences depression in the future, you don't have to feel guilt, condemnation. Oh, I should have gone. Why am I? It's okay. Own it. Get in the garden. And that's just another thing you have to work through. Maybe something just happened. Every day things can make you depressed. So we've got to see depression, anxiety, terror, fear, despair, not as evil things, but as helpful messengers, warning signals that there's the work to be done, that there's a reason why there's an origin story. Okay, so that's what I'd say there, Adam.
My gosh, that's incredible. There's so much here. One from this perspective that we can't change anyone, that all we can do is be support. I mean, man, that picture of Jesus in the garden and the very human experience he was having, the need he had simply for support as he was to go through something. I mean, that's just powerful.
Yeah.
Dr. Leaf, that's just powerful. Man, the idea that transformation and wholeness is an inside out as opposed to an outside in job. I think that's what you're saying. There's so much to unpack in just the idea that our brain is wired for love, wired for optimism, wired in that way. And that's how God created us. I mean, that's just incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Because, most Christians know that God is love. I mean, most of the world knows that God is love. Most of us aren't living as though we are wired for love, as though that's how we were designed and created.
Yeah.
I don't know that most of us actually are walking in this. I think this is some of the rethinking that we're doing, is that we are actually created in the image of love. God is love, and we are wired for love. We are created to know love, to live, continually growing more confident in love. And one of the things that cuts us off from this is shame and condemnation. You said those are the things that we need to address, things that we need to not run from. But the other thing that you said that I find fascinating is you addressed this twice. You talked about the church being one of the places where seeing people experience breakthrough or wholeness or experiencing an actual renewal of the mind, it's almost harder in the church. Personally, I would say it's because the church is an outside-in approach at times, a behavior-focused approach where shame and condemnation are used to manipulate or control.
Yeah. They're like whips.
Yeah, like whips. An outside approach to control behavior. And of course, shame and condemnation can be used as a tool to modify behavior for a moment, but none of that's actual transformation. None of it's sustainable.
And not sustainable. Mm-hmm.
And it's not only not sustainable, it's counterproductive to the journey of transformation. It actually cuts us off from being changed. Is that fair to say that you run into more obstacles regarding seeing people experience freedom and wholeness within the church?
Absolutely.
Is that fair to say?
Oh gosh, it's unreal. It's unreal. And it's honestly years that I'm seeing this, and I see it, and I work in every environment and across the board, from corporate to neuroscience, medical. I train physicians, and I see this absolutely legalistic whip-lashed kind of minds that are too scared to actually say who they are and what they are. And it's like you can't admit that you're depressed or anxious or whatever. And it's only 4% of churches are talking about mental health. And when they do, it's all about, it's a sickness, go to the doctor, pass the buck. I mean, it's terrible. The churches should be should be where people are able to be comfortable enough to actually embrace, process, and reconceptualize. The model of Jesus is not being carried out in the church at all. I don't believe at all.
Wow.
and I maybe that's a very strong statement, but I go across the board and across the world. And with pre-COVID, I traveled 70% of the month, and I have worked in, I don't know what environments I haven't worked in, literally. And going into even into the United Nations soon and that kind of thing, so we can reach larger. But I've worked in different countries, and I've worked in war-torn Rwanda and all kinds of places. And consistently I'm seeing whenever there's a legalistic model in place, and it's not just the church, it's wherever there's a very religious legalistic model in place, you will have people that are tremendously emotionally impaired, so caught up in shame and condemnation that they can't function. And this is where we have to get back to the realization that this is all mind. You are mind driven. No mind, no you. And you can think, feel, and choose. And you're always thinking, when you think you will feel, when you think and feel, you will choose. This is the gift that God has instilled in us as a made in God image. We have this perfect way of thinking, feeling, and choosing. And as those should go together, that's mind. As you think and feel and choose, you're going to build these thoughts. There's a consequence. I lay before you life and death. Okay. But there's a way out. And the way out is that you are going to make a lot of crazy choices, because that is life. I don't know how to say this. This will set a lot of people free if they get what I'm saying. God is totally okay with you making mistakes and experimenting, because every experience is an experiment. We can't control the events and circumstances, but we can learn to manage our mind and control our reactions and responses. And that's what we're not teaching people. We're not teaching people about mind, what it is, what brain is, how to manage mind. And we should be teaching our kids from babies. It should be part of school curriculum. This is your mind. This is how you manage your mind. So what I've done in this neurocycle concept over 25 years of clinical practice, 38 years of clinical research, I've put this together and created this concept of the neurocycle, which is the 5-step scientific process of how you capture thought and how you renew your mind. Whether it is in the moment, like to now, you have an argument with someone, or you have an Instagram issue, or someone says a comment that makes you unhappy, or whatever it may be. Anything to the big stuff of dealing with toxic stuff. The big stuff like toxic traumas, I explain in this book in the second half how to do the 5 steps of the neurocycle, how to use it for the in the moment stuff. So you can use it, the 5 steps in a few seconds, just to manage those in the moment stuff. And then also how to use the 5 steps for 15 to 45 minutes a day to deal with the traumas, those toxic traumas, the big T, the small T, the acute, plus the toxic habits. Also how to build your brain and build new habits into your life. So it's how to use your mind. And when you're doing that, the more you do it, the better you get. So I'm not saying that I've got it all together, but I'm getting there because I practice the skill all the time. So now if I get irritated with my husband or frustrated with my kids, because 3 of them work for me and my husband works in the business, so we're a family-run business, very easy to get irritated. Now I know how to capture myself quickly and recognize my warning signals, gather awareness of them, reflect on them, write it down, recheck, active reach, which is the 5 steps, explained in detail in the book. That's the neurocycle, and that's how you manage your mind. So you're using your mind, your wise mind, the made in God's image mind, to manage the mental mess, and you do that all the time. So in closing, literally, you can go 3 weeks without food. You can go 3 days without water. You can go 3 minutes without oxygen. But you can't even go 3 seconds without your mind working. So the underlying argument is, if your mind is always responding, at nighttime it sorts out the thoughts that you built during the day, your mind is building thoughts. If you're always responding, that means that the underlying premise is you need to manage that. Wow. So there's my closing statement.
Oh, wow. Yes, such a great closing statement. And I really think this is where your book is going to help people, because it is so practical in giving just the step-by-step way that we can clean up this mess in our minds.
And that's what I'm teaching you how to do it. Exactly. The how-to.
We're honored to have you on. But
thank you so much.
Before we let you go, we know you got to go, but we got to talk about tacos. It's in the title. Do you like tacos?
I do, but I'm not crazy about them. Sorry.
Oh, no.
My kids love them.
All right. That's a hard thing to hear.
I know.
Well, what about shawarmas? You're from South Africa, right?
In South Africa, yeah.
Shawarmas are just basically a South African taco.
That's That's true. I do like shawarma. So yes, then I suppose I can say I do.
Oh, that was close.
As long as it's grass-fed, wild, farm to table, organic, I'm good.
That'll work.
Dr. Leaf, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on
Thank you
here
so
today. I
much.
know you're going to help so many people, and it has just been a joy hearing about your heart for people having healthy brains. If people want to find you, where should they look? Internet, Instagram, all the places. Tell us where we can find you.
It's my pleasure. And people can get the book at cleaningupyourmentalmess.com and my Instagram handle, Dr. Caroline Leaf, or drleaf.com.
Dr. Leaf, thank you so much for being on the show today and giving us your time and leading us into this world of healing.
Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Hey guys, we're so glad that you are joining us for season 2 of Rethinking God with Tacos. You can find me, Derek Turner, at rivercharlotte.com. That's my church. And I'm on all the social medias as Pastor Derek T, Derek, Pastor Derek T.
Yeah, and he's a Twitter savant. You got to follow him on Twitter. I'm also on Twitter at Jason Clark is. And you can find all of these podcasts, including season 1, on all of the platforms. You can also go to afamilystory.org, and everything's there. If you sign up for our mailing list, we send out a weekly email that has articles, podcast information, and we also let you know about new books coming out or events that we're connected to. So like, share, retweet, and man, if you could write a review, it actually does something for the rankings. It makes it more available. So,
but a 5-star review, of course.
Yes.
You know, if you can't write a 5-star review or something, like, just don't even write a review.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you can't say something nice,
don't say anything at all. I like that, and then apply that to this podcast. Definitely.
That's my motto. That's what I do.
I love it. So love you guys. Appreciate you coming on the ride with us. God bless.